Everyone's talking about the brutal, unforgiving winter that's supposedly going to crush Ukraine once and for all, wave after wave of Russian missiles and drones slamming into power plants, substations, and the electrical grid, plunging cities into darkness, leaving millions without heat as temperatures plummet below freezing. The mainstream narrative has been hammered into us for months. Russia is weaponizing the cold. Putin is trying to freeze the Ukrainian people into submission, break their will, force Kyiv to the negotiating table on Moscow's terms. Western media outlets, think tanks, analysts, they all repeat the same grim forecast. Ukraine faces its toughest winter yet, civilians suffering, morale cracking under the relentless bombardment of energy infrastructure. But pause for a second. What if that entire story is missing the biggest plot twist of all? What if I told you that the country truly at risk of not surviving this winter isn't Ukraine, but Russia itself? And no, I'm not spinning some wild fantasy about a sudden Ukrainian super offensive that magically obliterates the Russian military overnight. This is far more insidious, far more structural, and infinitely more dangerous for Vladimir Putin. His vaunted war economy, the one he's been bragging about for years, as invincible, immune to sanctions, running on endless oil money and patriotic fervors and just struggling. It's overheating to the point of meltdown, cracking under impossible strain, and now, as we head into the deepest freeze of 2025 to 2026, it's on the verge of exploding spectacularly from the inside out. Russia has already plunged headfirst into a full-blown recession, one that Putin's own officials can no longer deny, no matter how much propaganda they pump out. The numbers are brutal, undeniable, and they're only getting worse as winter tightens its grip. In the cold months ahead, they could deliver the kind of economic reckoning that no amount of battlefield gains can paper over. Let's go back to the moment this all crystallized. December 17th, 2025. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha dropped an absolute bombshell threat on X, detailed data-packed takedown of the Russian economy that should have dominated its headlines worldwide but somehow got buried under the usual fog of war updates. Sybiha didn't mince words. He declared that Russia's federal budget is drowning in red ink deeper than ever before. And this is the precise moment for the West to ratchet up sanctions pressure to unbearable levels. There is now a real possibility, he wrote, of making the cost of continuing the war truly intolerable for the Kremlin. This wasn't wishful thinking or empty rhetoric. Sybiha backed every claim with a barrage of official Russian figures that even Moscow can't discredit. Dive into those numbers, and the picture is apocalyptic. From January through November 2025, Russia's federal budget deficit exploded to a staggering $54 billion. That's not a minor shortfall. That's a gaping black hole sucking in everything around it. And analysts warn it's not done growing. By the time 2025 closes out, the deficit could swell to a record-shattering $70 billion. Moscow is scrambling, burning through reserves, borrowing at insane rates. But there's simply not enough revenue coming in to stem the bleeding. It gets worse when you zoom in on the regions. Back in 2024, Russia's various federal subjects, those provinces and republics collectively, enjoyed a comfortable surplus of around $12 billion. A cushion, something to fall back on. Fast forward to now, and that surplus has completely evaporated and flipped into the opposite. A consolidated regional deficit of $1.5 billion. Local governments are broke, services are strained. And the ripple effects are hitting ordinary Russians where it hurts most. Hospitals, schools, roads, pensions. But the real death blow, the one that's strangling the entire system, is the collapse in energy revenues. The golden goose that's kept Putin's regime afloat for decades. Oil and gas aren't just exports for Russia. They're the foundation of the budget, historically accounting for 40% or more of federal income. In November 2025 alone, those revenues cratered by a devastating 34% compared to November 2024. That's not a blip or a bad month. That's $3.5 billion wiped out in just 4 weeks. In December, it's shaping up to be an absolute disaster. Projections show Russia pulling in roughly half of what it earned from oil and gas. Exports in December 2024, we're talking levels not seen since the darkest days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when global demand evaporated overnight. Urals crude, Russia's benchmark oil grade, is trading far below the price Moscow desperately needs just to break even on its budget. Sanctions have capped prices. Ukrainian drone swarms have repeatedly hammered refineries and export terminals. Buyers are vanishing as secondary sanctions kick in, and the global shift away from Russian energy is accelerating. Putin's once mighty oil weapon has turned into a liability, a slow-motion train wreck, draining billions every month. The most infuriating part for Russians, at least, is that none of this blindsided the Kremlin. Putin's own hand-picked officials sounded the alarm loud and clear months earlier. Rewind to June 2025, the flashy St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where Russia's elite gather to pat themselves on the back about economic resilience. Their economic development minister Maxim Reshetnikov stepped up and delivered a sobering, almost prophetic warning. The numbers show the economy is cooling off rapidly. Judging by current business sentiment, we're basically already standing on the brink of falling into recession. He wasn't some opposition figure or foreign analyst. This was Putin's own minister. Reading from internal data, Russia's central bank piled on REPORTING that GDP growth for 2025 had ground down to essentially zero. Inflation was roaring despite brutal interest rates. Factories were slowing. Consumer spending was contracting. The signs were everywhere. Putin's response? Classic strongman denial on steroids. By September, he was publicly insisting that no, the economy wasn't stagnating at all. Interest rates hovering between 18% and 21%. Perfectly normal, he claimed, just tough medicine to wrestle down inflation. When advisors and experts dared whisper the word recession, Putin essentially banned it from existence. His direct quote, "Some specialists and experts are pointing to the risks of stagnation or even recession." This, of course, is not to be allowed under any circumstances. He literally ordered the recession not to happen. As if economic laws bend to the will of one man in the Kremlin. It's the kind of delusional hubris that would be hilarious if the consequences weren't so tragic for millions of ordinary Russians now bearing the full brunt. Because reality doesn't negotiate. And now, as winter bites, the Kremlin is resorting to the oldest playbook. Squeeze the population. Try to keep the war machine grinding. Taxes are going through the roof. The value-added tax VAT, that sneaky sales tax baked into virtually everything Russians buy, is jumping from 20% to 22% starting in 2026. It seems small, but VAT was already one of the Kremlin's biggest cash cows, raking in around 15% of total revenue. Now, they'll milk even more from families already struggling with skyrocketing food and utility prices. The finance ministry didn't stop there. They slashed the revenue threshold for small and medium-sized enterprises, hauling thousands more businesses into higher tax brackets. They introduced new levies on gambling and bookmakers. And perhaps most cynically, they hiked personal income taxes across the board, shattering Putin's own repeated promises that the tax system would remain untouched until at least 2030. All this while inflation devours savings. Ultra-high interest rates make loans and mortgages unaffordable, and real purchasing power collapses. Russians are getting poorer by the month, more vulnerable, more desperate. And as Sibaha pointed out in his thread, while the population suffers, Putin's cronies and war profiteers keep lining their pockets. Where is all this desperately scraped-together money going? Not to hospitals, not to infrastructure, not to easing the burden on citizens. It's pouring straight into the bottomless pit of the war. Ukraine's military intelligence chief Kyrilo Budanov estimates the full-scale invasion is now costing Russia up to $1 billion per day soldiers' salaries. Ammunition, fuel, repairs, recruitment bonuses for cannon fodder, and the Kremlin's freshly passed budget for 2026? It allocates a jaw-dropping $209.5 billion to national defense alone, more than ever before. Crowding out everything else, it's a suicidal spiral. Endless war drives massive spending. Massive spending explodes deficits. Exploding deficits force crushing taxes and cuts. Crushing taxes deepen the recession, and the recession makes it even harder to fund the war. Round and round, faster and faster, toward collapse. Meanwhile, Western sanctions, the ones Putin loves to mock as ineffective and boomeranging, are working exactly as intended, just slower and steadier than some hoped. Take Russia's notorious shadow fleet, that ragtag armada of aging, often unseaworthy tankers flying flags of convenience from places like Liberia or Panama. Used to sneak oil past price caps and embargoes, it's falling apart. As of mid-December, nearly 180 million barrels of Russian crude are stuck floating on the high seas. Unable to offload a 40% surge since late August, buyers are scared off by the threat of secondary sanctions. Insurance companies won't touch the vessels. Ports refuse entry. Over 400 Shadow Fleet ships have now been individually sanctioned by the US, UK, EU, and Canada combined. Lloyd's of London and other major insurers have pulled coverage. The workaround that kept billions flowing into Moscow for years is crumbling in real time. And then, on that same pivotal December 17th, the European Parliament unleashed what could prove to be the killing stroke. By a resounding vote, 500 in favor. Just 120 against, they approved sweeping new energy sanctions. An immediate ban on spot market purchases of Russian liquefied natural gas LNG starting early 2026. A complete phase-out of remaining pipeline gas supplies by September 30, 2027. And a firm commitment from the European Commission to table legislation banning Russian oil and petroleum product imports entirely before the end of 2027. This is huge. For years, critics hammered the EU for hypocrisy, preaching solidarity with Ukraine, while quietly keeping the gas flowing to fill their own needs. And the numbers were embarrassing. In the first half of 2025 alone, countries like Spain, Belgium, France, and the Netherlands collectively spent more on Russian LNG than the total value of military aid they've provided to Kyiv. Billions upon billions funneled straight to Putin's war chest, while Ukrainian soldiers fought with whatever scraps arrived. That era is over. The EU is finally decisively turning off the tap, one of the last major lifelines keeping Russia's energy revenues afloat. Combined with falling global prices, relentless Ukrainian strikes on export infrastructure, and tightening enforcement on the Shadow Fleet, Moscow's war chest is being drained faster than it can be refilled. Step back and look at the full nightmare unfolding for Putin. Record deficits devouring the budget. Energy revenues in freefall to pandemic-era lows. A confirmed recession deepening by the month. Taxes hammering an already impoverished population. Sanctions closing every loophole just as the harshest winter in years sets in. Russia's economy is teetering on the edge of a cliff. In 2026 could be the year it goes over. The most terrifying aspect for the Kremlin. There's still massive untapped potential to make things infinitely worse. As Sibaha emphasized, only about 20% of Russia's sprawling military-industrial complex is currently under direct sanctions. That leaves a staggering 80% still operating, supplying the front lines, generating profits for oligarchs. If the West finally summons the political will to target the rest, factories, supply chains, banks, technology imports, the economic pressure could become truly existential. Because here's the key insight Sibaha drove home. Putin doesn't lose sleep over the thousands of Russian soldiers sacrificed daily for a few hundred meters of frozen, muddy Ukrainian territory. He treats them as expendable statistics. But money, personal wealth, the yachts, the palaces, the offshore accounts of his inner circle, that he counts obsessively, hit him there hard enough, consistently enough, and even a dictator starts looking for the exit ramp. This winter isn't just another season of hardship. It could be historic at the turning point where Russia's aggressive gamble in Ukraine begins to collapse under its own unsustainable weight. Putin set out to freeze Ukraine into defeat. Instead, he might end up freezing Russia's future, burying his legacy under the rubble of a self-inflicted economic catastrophe. So what do you think? Can Putin somehow bluff, borrow, and brutalize his way through another year of mounting carnage? Will the recession force cracks in the elite, protests in the streets, or even whispers of regime change? Or will the West hesitate again, giving Moscow just enough breathing room to stagger on? Drop your thoughts, predictions, hottest takes in the comments. I read them all and love the debate. If this deep dive blew your mind or shifted your perspective on where this war is really heading, do me a solid. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and hit the notification bell so you're first in line for the next breakdown. Coming up soon, the explosive multi-billion-dollar plan involving Russia's frozen overseas assets that could supercharge Ukraine's fight and push the Kremlin closer to financial breaking point than ever before.